Live. Hey, everybody. Longtime friend Mike Silver here, just fresh from NFL Network, talking about all the stuff that we need to know about the league and then some. But he also has on his Pass It On podcast a great conversation with Jack Becta. Who is he? He's the agent for none other than George Kittle, who is not the richest man on earth, but he kind of made a nice push in that direction with his 5 year, $75 million contract, the story of which this man broke. So you can find out the behind the scenes about it on this. As you can see, it's called Anatomy of the George Kittle Deal with agent Jack Becta. But Mike, talk to us about not only the deal, but your relationship with Jack Becta, George Kittle, and what this kind of deal tells us about pro football in the middle of a pandemic.
Well, first of all, it's Pass It Down. Sorry, got to correct you there, just because it's all right. Just, I got to be shamelessly self-promoting at all times. But, yeah, we've had some star-studded and really legendary guests so far since we've been doing this podcast that launched a few months ago. And we've had legends like Uncle Luke and Barry Switzer and star-studded people like Steve Kerr, NFL stars like Cam Jordan. But I thought it was important to have Jack be the guest this week because I wrote this kind of long backstory on NFL.com of how the Kittle deal played out over really a 6-month plus period and some of the peaks and valleys. And, Jack was really helpful in piecing that all together. And I knew that Natalie and I, my daughter Natalie, my co-host, she and I would enjoy talking to Jack. But before we got into it, we had to tell the story, which Natalie didn't know, of how Jack and I really bonded a few years ago. And it's an incredible story at the Combine where, the Combine is like spring break for coaches and scouts, and we're out till all hours of the morning every night. And, to me, it's a great access, situation, but I'm also certainly enjoying it and not sleeping a ton. And by the time everyone goes home at different times, but by the time you see someone at the Indy airport and they're getting ready for that return flight, they are a zombie usually. You're not focusing and you look like haven't slept a ton for a week plus and you just want to get out. And so I arrived a few years ago in one of those states at the Indy airport, and I see this familiar face coming toward me looking like that too. But Jack had a story to tell, and it involved him going into the wrong bathroom at the Indy airport and then going into a stall, unbeknownst to him, conducting his business over, a prolonged period. And at some point realizing that he was not in the men's room and, had no choice at that point but to leave and wash his hands. And, the looks on the people's faces, I'm sure, were, they were completely aghast. And so he told me that story. And so I thought that took it to a new level. And as we were then continuing to talk and bond, we went through security together, kept talking, and then realized we'd walked completely out of the secure area and back into the pool of, the food court and had to go back through the same security line ignominiously. So, I've known Jack a long time. His detail was great. And the Kittle deal was really an interesting one and had some obstacles because of various things, but they did get it done in time for the 2020 season, and it ended well.
Hey, maybe you can help me with something because I was at the Combine this year and I happened to be sitting down at the Marriott, which you know much better than I do. And I was joined all of a sudden by a group of people, including I was Jenna Lang, I think from ESPN, covers the Bucks, and
Yes.
And some other scouts. And to make a long story short, I was told, and I can't say by who because it wasn't her, but was that they expected Austin Hooper to basically break the bank for tight ends at that time. And he eventually did sign with the Cleveland Browns, but the thought was that at the time, the Niners wanted Hooper to join Kittle and make this kind of, second coming of the heyday of Hernandez and Gronkowski when they were with the Patriots. Any idea whatever happened with that plan?
Yeah, great question. I actually do know because I broke the Hooper story signing too, and I've known Hooper a long time. So I'll backpedal for a second. The tight end market is weird. It has been weird, and really not since Jimmy Graham in 2013 or 2014 has someone signed a deal that reflected what should have been the market for various reasons. Zach Ertz and Travis Kelce were never free. Gronk took below market deals, as the Patriots sometimes managed to convince people to do. And, Austin Hooper was the first guy, and he's not productivity-wise on that same level yet. But he was the first guy to actually hit the free agent market, and he did finally break the 10 million threshold, which was the old Jimmy Graham threshold existing. But he got to 10.5 annual average per year. But you are right. The 49ers, that was not widely reported at the time. I did report it, but they were a team that got in, and there were some other teams, looking pretty hard. He ended up signing with the Browns. But yes, Kyle Shanahan was his offensive coordinator in Atlanta and knows what he can do. And that was not in my, as in my understanding, that was not, hey, let's get Austin Hooper and pay him big money in case we can't get Kittle done or to give us the chance to not get Kittle done. It was, we want them both. And you're right. They do very different things. Hooper more of a receiver type, whereas Kittle, who is a great, their number one weapon in the passing game, but is a mauler on the line and gets you that blocking up. But, Hooper thought about it, and I think he would have taken less potentially to go back with Kyle and probably be favored to win the NFC. But it was an interesting thing. And remember, the 49ers, around as all that was playing out, they made the choice to trade DeForest Buckner, who, on paper is one of the best players in the league and has been great there, and then sign Eric Armstead, who plays alongside him on that defensive line. And they paid Armstead a lot, but they paid him less than they would have paid Buckner. So that theoretically freed up some money, which theoretically ultimately went to Kittle. But because of the tight end market, the fact that Kittle's rookie deal was so low as a fifth-round pick and hadn't made any money, the pandemic and what it did to the psyche of owners, the fact that both Kyle Shanahan and general manager John Lynch were getting redone amid that entire backdrop, the Armstead Kittle thing, all that went into the stew of trickiness that kind of, was a shroud over these negotiations all offseason long.
What is it that eventually closed it from your perspective? Not to give too much away from the podcast, but what was it that made this? This is going to get done.
Well, this is what happened. So, you also had, by the way, in a normal offseason, George Kittle could have just skipped some OTAs or something to register his displeasure. That wasn't easy this year because you could skip a Zoom, but it's not really the same impact. And why give up the off-season workout bonus money when all you're doing is Zooming? And are you really registering your displeasure? So the other thing that happened was the deadline would normally be, hey, he's going to make way below market year 4. We don't want him playing for that. We don't want him exposed to injury. So we want this done by the time he reports to camp. Well, this year, reporting to camp wasn't really putting you in harm's way. You were testing, you were isolating, then you were doing walkthroughs and meetings, but it wasn't, July 28th was the reporting day, but really the first day they were going to really practice was August 17th. So that was really the trigger deadline that they wanted to get it done by. And they hit a real crisis point in late July. And we get into this on the podcast, but one of the things that happened is John Lynch gets his extension, and Jack Becta, in the midst of sending kind of a salty text about the state of negotiations, adds on at the end, oh, by the way, congrats on your deal. And John didn't take it well, and he got upset, and George had gotten upset about some stuff, and they actually called a timeout one weekend. But what really broke things open was a meeting between John Lynch and George Kittle in person at the facility after that timeout the next Monday. And that's when George Kittle enunciated very clearly what was most important to him. And essentially he said in so many words, I'm not caught up in the vanity of the average per year. Yes, I want to, make a lot, and that's important, but I'm not going to trip out over whether it looks like it's X million or X million. The most important things to me are the guarantee structure and the amount of guaranteed money. And the 49ers for a decade or so have managed to impose this structure on all their big second contracts and big free agent contracts, including quarterback deals with Colin Kaepernick and Jimmy Garoppolo, where they've essentially, and I'll try to simplify this, but not for your benefit, but for, people like me who've had to kind of like learn the Cliff Notes version of this. But, basically a lot of that year's salary and guarantees aren't guaranteed for injury under this structure they typically impose until April 1st. Well, what that does is it gives the team a chance at the start of free agency, which is usually second week of March, the start of the league year, to look around and go, well, hey, maybe we can get Austin Hooper here and pay him less than we would pay George Kittle. Maybe we want to get – it's a bad example because he wouldn't do that with George Kittle. But, maybe we want to get Tom Brady and replace Jimmy Garoppolo. We can go through that whole process for a couple of weeks and figure out whether we do it and not have to tell Jimmy G that he's cut and we're not on the hook for this guaranteed money until April 1st. Well, by then, the free agent market is closed out and they're at a disadvantage. So what Kittle said to John Lynch is, I don't want that structure. I want it to be the year before that you have to decide that April. And that way I'll have peace of mind. I'm not a rented player. You're buying me, you're not renting me. And so, which is an oversimplification, but that's the gist of it. And the next day, John Lynch and Parag Marathe, who's their executive vice president and their salary cap guru, called up Jack Becton and said, listen, we've never yielded on this structure, but we're going to do it here because we think George is a unique and special player. And we believe that if a player is this special and can perform like George does and be as important in the locker room, we're open to that now. And so once that happened, it was on the fast track. It still wasn't easy. There was still a lot to be, batted around and hammered out over the next week and a half. But that's when it got to a good place.
Do you think this deal could have been done were it not for the success of Rob Gronkowski? And I'll explain where I'm headed. They're very, very physical. They're both very flamboyant in their play, if you will. They're telegenic in terms of personality. Is it fair to say that Ron Gronkowski set the table for George Kittle and the contract that he got?
Well, yeah, yes and no. Yes, Gronk is in my opinion, going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer and an incredibly impactful player, and I deserve to get paid a lot more than he did. I would say no, it didn't set the table in that Gronk wasn't getting market value really ever. Right. Part of it by his choice. He signed extensions earlier than he had to, and part of it was he just got really beat up, which I think goes back to my earlier point in that, it has certainly taken an incredible toll on Gronk's body, and he's a tough guy who's played through insane things. And so when George Kittle said to John Lynch, I don't care about the vanity of the average per year, I care about the peace of mind and the guarantees, the second part of that was he said, quote, I want to go to sleep at night not worrying about how I play, and I want to play like an angry bull. And we would all agree that that's kind of how he plays. I mean, it's breathtaking. But I think George is at peace with the fact that he may not have incredible career longevity because of the way he plays, and he would rather leave it all on the field and and just do what he does and play that way. And if it means that some year, he's not going to be able to do it at that level physically, well, they might move on, but they're not going to be able to move on and take some of that money back.
Do you think now that the Niners have him signed up, that they're done and their team is set, or what are the holes are they looking at plugging up?
It's a great question. I would say they're probably done in that, they have an incredible team coming back, and maybe more important or as important, they didn't lose those great assistant coaches that they have. Mike McDaniel, the genius who helps Kyle Shanahan with the run game, which you saw in the playoffs on display. Mike LaFleur, Matt's younger brother, who's the passing game coordinator, who's being groomed as kind of the next guy there. There are a lot of them. I'm just going to skip over them. But, of course, Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator, who came very close to getting the Browns job, because I understand his interview was just, phenomenal. And he's a very, very impressive guy. I believe he'll be a head coach after this season. And, after being maligned for 2 years at defensive coordinator, hey, they got Nick Bosa, D Ford came in, shored things up a little bit. And all of a sudden, his coaching ability is hitting everybody over the head. So, I think they're done, but I also think that they are, they're an ever-probing front office that's always looking, and, they've got some injury issues at receiver right now. You don't know how things are going to evolve. And I think, one area, the NFC West is so competitive, and, Kyle is such a great coach. Those assistants are so great. John Lynch has done a terrific job getting the players that Kyle wants and really following Kyle's directives. And they have so many good players. But one area where everybody is looking up, not just in the division, but in all of football, in my opinion, is John Schneider in Seattle is, to me, the king of being aggressive and constantly looking to push the envelope. And you saw that with the Jamal Adams trade. And John Schneider is always open to shaking it up and getting better and dealing from strength and all that. And so I think when you are in the same division battling with the Seahawks year in, year out, you can't help but no matter how good your team is, I think if you're Kyle and John, you're always going like, yeah, but what if we did this? And they thought about Odell Beckham. They've thought about some guys over the years that, really would have, infused them with even more talent.
Yeah, since you mentioned it, I got, by the way, Mason Riggs is, or ZDC Tuvlari says, talking about both Gronk and also Kittle, they both impact the game in every phase of offense, transcendent.
Very well said. Very well said.
Mason. Now, you mentioned the Seahawks, which makes me think about the Ravens, which makes me think of, I know this is where my weird brain works, but I heard you talk about Earl Thomas. What the heck is going on with him, man?
Yeah, it's a great question. So,
you gotta Earl was all,
listen, he was always a guy in Seattle. First of all, I'll preface it by saying he's literally one of the best football players I've ever seen in my life. And I would put Richard Sherman in that category too. Just what the impact of what he did in Seattle, the plays he made, just all of it. I mean, it's breathtaking. So he part of the Earl Thomas package was always, he's kind of high maintenance. And, listen, he's not the only guy like that. A lot of great receivers, especially, and quarterbacks and other people are. He's a very emotional guy. He's a very prideful guy who rightfully believes in his own abilities at a very high level. I mean, I can relate, I get it. But, and not saying that I'm the Earl Thomas of sports writing. I don't know if I'm saying that, but I am saying that I'm high maintenance and cocky. But, listen.
There's nothing wrong with either one. I'll just say
that. And sometimes the true artists are emotional. It's part of their brilliance, right? So
part of being a Leo. I'll just say that.
So exactly, that too. So it ended bad in Seattle, but I thought the bad ending in Seattle was explainable by money, and that was him and the front office, and that happens with a lot of players. But then you go to Baltimore, and like the Seahawks, the Ravens and the Seahawks are the two franchises in this century who have best, been able to handle big personalities and let them be themselves, and in the confines of their culture and locker room, kind of welcome that. And they're probably my two favorite teams to cover, honestly, year in, year out because of that. And so you would think, well, it didn't didn't end well with the Seahawks, but money was going on. But the Ravens would be a perfect place. But I don't know if Earl's gotten more pronounced in some of these ways. I think maybe he has, or maybe it was just a bad fit. But from the start, it just started badly and then got progressively worse. And Earl's always been kind of like Junior Seau was and some other greats, Troy Polamalu. He's a risk taker. He's not always into the structure. In other words, if you tell Earl Thomas, line up right here and do this, he might have a sense that something else is going on over there, and he might just go to it. And sometimes you're going to get burned, and sometimes you're going to, take a 65-yard interception to the house. And, different people have different tolerance for that. But he's always been that kind of guy on the field. And I think in Baltimore, for whatever reason, off the field, he was cutting it a little loose with being late and not showing up. And it just wasn't fitting in culturally, and he probably wasn't playing at the level he was accustomed to. He was carrying himself as though he was playing at the highest of levels. He wasn't on point all the time in their estimation. And it got to the point last year where he was told, hey, listen, man, you're getting fined a lot, and we're getting into conduct detrimental territory potentially, which is the reason that language is so important is because it can lead to voided contracts, voided guarantees. And so that was already going on last year. He got back this year. They really didn't get back till the end of July, but it's just it seemed to have accelerated this year. And then I reported on TV earlier today that a couple of days before the incident that ultimately led to the breakup, where he punched teammate Chuck Clark, fellow safety, in the face at practice. 2 days before that, Earl had been complaining about the lack of a long enough break between practice and meetings, which is kind of weird in training camp. You're ostensibly stuck there. And 2 days before that incident, he was late, and they asked him what the hell was going on, and his excuse was, yeah, well, I had to get my car washed. So, that whether that's a guy who wasn't liking his environment and was trying to force the issue, or somebody who was just saying something, for effect, or whether he literally felt like my car has to get washed. I mean, we've all had that, right? The car's so dirty, you just you hate it. Now, I'm not brave enough to miss a mandatory work assignment because I just had to get my car washed and then say that's why I did it. I may think.
I gotta ask. In fairness to him, are we talking about a supercar?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It must have been one dirty vehicle, but I will say, most of us aren't brave enough, no matter how high our opinions of ourselves might be. In my case, but most of us aren't brave enough to try that stunt at work. But he did, and then. I would just say this. I think it's confusing for some people because there was this bad backdrop, at least in the Ravens' eyes. I have not heard Earl's side of it, so this is all based on Raven sources. But there was this backdrop, and then some people say, well, listen, yeah, there was a fight in training camp, but come on, dude, there's always fights in training camp. But as you know, Zeddy, there are different types of fights. The typical training camp fight is player A on offense has been lining up against player B day in, day out. In the old days, 2-a-days. It's hot. They're sweating. They don't like each other. They're talking. They're fighting. They're going up against each other. And finally, one guy throws another guy to the ground, and he snaps, and he gets up, and they throw punches, sometimes with pads and helmets on, or not. But it gets broken up, and it's just two guys who had enough of each other and enough of training camp. And that's kind of your typical training camp fight. And it's usually not a major deal. But to have two people in the same unit, let alone position group, fight is kind of extraordinary. And we remember the Michael Westbrook Stephen Davis incident. That was crazy. Stephen Davis wasn't even looking. We remember the Steve Smith Ken Lucas incident, which was not that was not an on the field situation. But so this is a little bit closer to that, and so that's why it's not just. Yeah, I mean, listen, if Earl Thomas was just kind of missing some meetings here and there, or being late once in a while, and then he and a receiver had been chippy for a few days, and it was hot, and they ended up, throwing a couple punches at each other after after locking up on a drill, I don't think that would have been any big deal. It's more that everyone in that building, from what I could tell, was pretty much sick of his crap. And what triggered the fight was that he had done the wrong thing in a red zone drill, and Chuck Clark, his fellow safety, said, "Hey, come on, you need to do this," and threw his helmet angrily, slammed his helmet to the ground. And Earl said, "Come on, man, I got it. It's cool." And Chuck Clark said, "No, it's not cool. If you would show up for walkthrough or not be late, you would get it." And obviously Earl didn't like that. So that's my understanding of what happened.
Hey, that begs the question. I'll ask this and then also talk about your next guest. But how much of this is involving something that was said about the pandemic? It tends to accelerate problems that were going to happen anyway. In this instance, is it that the mangled schedule for the players has brought out bad habits to the fore that under normal structure would have been held in place,
Maybe in other cases. In this case, I don't think that's at play here. I just think it picked up where it left off last year. And because they won so much last year, it was masked a little bit too, because they thought he was a pain in the butt and it wasn't going well. But hey, they were winning. He was voted to the Pro Bowl. Probably it was his worst Pro Bowl season of his many, but he still made it. And I just think now you get back and it seems like it's getting even worse. But with all that said, it is a fair question. I mean, it's been the most surreal offseason of our lifetimes, and it's challenging in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. And in the old days, when I started covering, even in '89, you had guys who kind of came in. Some guys came in out of shape, and that was the whole concept of two-a-days. We're going to sweat it out. We're going to beat it out of them and get them into shape. And it wasn't physiologically necessarily the best way to prepare a football team for a season, but it was old school. And over time, with off-season programs becoming voluntary but not voluntary for the most part, and just people with personal trainers and realize you got to be on this more than 7 months a year, 6.5 months a year. It became an outlier when someone came in out of shape, and usually it's someone who had been injured all off, recovering from an injury all off season and really couldn't train the way that they, wanted to. So maybe it could expose that. But yeah, I just think this was a more unique situation, and it's unfortunate because, as I said, Earl's one of the best I've ever seen, and I love the Ravens culture. And I do think I think it's going to hurt Earl, because it's one thing if a guy gets cut by Matt Patricia or something, and people around the league are going to go, yeah, okay, but Matt Patricia's kind of, being a hard ass, and I'm not even sure the Lions know how to do it. And so we'll get him in our building and it'll be cool. But I think because the Seahawks and Ravens are known for being able to give guys, room to be themselves and handle this stuff pretty well, the fact that the Ravens are saying, we don't want him, just cut him. I think a lot of teams are going to have to, it's going to give them pause, and they're going to do a lot of betting, because they're going, well, wait, they're pretty good at this and they didn't want him. So how's it going to be here?
Yeah. Hey, so next guest on Pass It Down. How do you follow up? This is a dangerous question with you. How do you follow up such a great podcast? What's next?
Well, we have a very special. I'm going to keep it a secret for now. We have a special episode. Well, I'll give you a hint. We had a special episode 14, and we recorded it all in person. It was a literal roundtable. So, given these times, that might be able to give you a hint. There's not a lot of people that would end up in my dining room other than my co-host Natalie. But we had two of them. One of them hosts his own podcast that's called Poddy, Poddy, Train Me, Poddy Train Me. And this young man he's on an incredible hot streak. His
is it like
Poddy train me, like Poddy, Poddy, new word, train me. So this young man, his last 2 shows have been bananas. Yes, that is correct. He had my former NFL Network colleague, now with ESPN, and my close friend Jeff Darlington as his guest for the most recent episode, and it just I got roasted quite a bit, but it was a highly entertaining episode.
You introduced me to Jeff Darlington. We were in Phoenix for the Lee Steinberg party. We were watching with. We were walking.
I'm sure I did, and I apologize for you have. But and then before he had the crazy Jeff Darlington episode, he interviewed 4 young men at UC Santa Barbara who played a 24-hour game of beer die, unbroken, drinking through it, and lived to tell about it. So I'm all geeked out on the Potty Train Me podcast, and we were lucky enough to have that guy and his brother all at our table. So we get into all sorts of subjects, including, if anyone has ever wondered why my Wikipedia says I was born in 1948, we reveal why that actually exists, which, by the way, sets expectations low. I feel like if you Wikipedia me and then you meet me, you're like, wow, it's all right.
So basically, the next show is going to be called Potty Train Me.
Yeah, that's the other podcast I'm pimping. But our episode 14 features the host of Potty Train Me, so I'm excited. It's our NFL season preview, and then we're gonna get some pretty big names in this next month. I think we're looking at a major soccer star, maybe my favorite American player right now, and it's not Alex Morgan, which is saying a lot, because maybe my co-favorite American player, but right up there with Alex.
Well, Alex is really blown up. I had the pleasure of interviewing her at CES in 2013, and look at her now. Wow.
She and a great kid. I met her when she was a senior at Cal, and super, super proud of the now mother and wife and person she's become. Never, when people like me back, years ago were screaming, put Alex Morgan in the starting lineup, play her more, she's unbelievable. She never, ever did anything but put her head down and just play hard and do, what was best for the team. She handled the spotlight incredibly, and now she speaks out for social justice, and just really proud of her.
Mike, I could talk with you for a long time, but you only have so much time, and we'll have you back, of course. And hey, keep rocking and keep breaking NFL news stories as you have done so expertly through your career.
Thank you so much for having me, Zenny, and hopefully I'll see you in the flesh at some point. But in the meantime, it's great seeing you on Zoom.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, folks, don't forget, okay? Remember to if you could ever do this, just pass it on, all right? Just pass it down.
Pass it down. Pass it down.
Pass it down. Dang it. Pass it down.
You can pass it on metaphorically, but what we literally need you to do is pass it down.
Pass it down, folks. And the weird thing about it is it was in my head to say pass it down, and I said on. So pass it down, folks. It's the same thing as, pass it down. Check it out. All right.
Check it out. There you go. Thank you so much for having me. Good time.
Hey, stick around in the background, Sil. Hey, folks, we'll be back later. Thank you all so very much for your support of Zenny62 on YouTube, and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com. Thank you.